Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Frank Reno, and I'm a product manager here at Sumo Logic. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about open source data collection, how you can embrace it and how you can use it to really expand the data that you can collect and also get a lot of great benefits out of it. I'm one of the product managers here at Sumo Logic. I focus on our metrics platform, Kubemetes, our open source data collection, and I'm also Sumo Logic's open source ambassador, as well as an open source contributor to the wider open source projects out there. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about why open source collection, how you can use it to your advantage. We're going to talk a little bit about the general open source agent landscape. And we're also going to just show you some examples of how you can use open source agents to send data to Sumo Logic. Now, before we dive into open source data collection, one thing I think it's good to understand is just kind of the state of open source today. You know, open source has come a long way, and I think it's changed a lot and changed a lot of views and perceptions of how it can be used and how it can help you. One of the reports that I rather enjoy every year comes from Red Hat, and it talks about the state of enterprise open source adoption. And you know, this question, I think, says a lot about just how far open source has come. 95% of respondents say that open source is strategically important to their business needs and to what they're working on. Only 5% would classify it as somewhat important. I think that speaks a lot to how open source has changed. You look at projects like Kubernetes and how they have been wildly successful, built massive communities behind them, and really changed the way that open source works in enterprise software. You know, we ourselves are kind of experiencing some growth and change in our own open source migrations as we're migrating away from a lot of homegrown tooling into open source. You know, Sumo Logic started 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, there was a number of tools that just didn't exist that we had to use to provision ourselves. So for example, you know, Terraform, kind of the de facto choice of doing any kind of cloud provisioning. You know, that tool didn't exist 10 years ago. We had to build ourselves. We built a homegrown tool called Dish. And now one of the things that we're looking at is how we can migrate from our own homegrown tooling to the widely accepted default choices in open source, Terraform for cloud provisioning. But there's other examples within Sumo. We ourselves are going through our own transformation from AWS EC2 traditional microservices architecture over to a Kubernetes-based architecture. Even we are doing data collection open source now and moving towards tools that we had like JMX trans that would send to our installed collector, heavily using our installed collector and our proprietary software, into Prometheus and into Fluentd and other technologies like this. I think that open source's growth has really changed these and accelerated these movements. And I think that it can bring a number of benefits into helping you not only with provisioning or microservices and moving to different architectures, but even with data collection. So why would you embrace open source data collection? There's a number of key benefits. Probably the top one is the fact that you're building on open standards. There's a number of open standards out there for metrics, open tracing, open APM, carbon format, graphite. These are all open standards that are out there to try and unify some things. And many of these agents out there that are used for collection all support one of these open standards. Not only is the open standards a benefit, but it also gives you a very comprehensive set of data to collect from. Many of these open source agents have been built and expanded upon over the years to grow the number of things that they can integrate with. You have the ability to collect all of the data. You don't have to reinvent. You don't have to go build some integration for something that may not exist. Very likely open source has solved that. That's one of the benefits of open source is that someone may have already built that. And if you do have to go build it, oftentimes open source exposes you with a pluggable framework that you can simply just leverage and use to get started very quickly. Open source also gives you the ability to be much more flexible. You can focus on the things that are important to you, the things that are important to your business offering and your core offering, and not data collection, not getting getting data from all these systems into some other locations. It can be very tricky to do that. It's not an easy task all the time. And being able to do so quickly so that you can focus on things that matter to your business gives you a lot of flexibility. And I think all of these things, when you look at it together, what this is about is it's about choice. It gives you choice. You get a choice to decouple data tooling from your use. When collection is built on open standards, when it's comprehensive, and when it gives you the flexibility you need, you get to have a choice of choosing what data collection you want to use separate from the tooling you're going to use. As long as the tooling embraces open standards, then the tooling doesn't matter. You can use one agent that's to send data from vendor A to vendor B. This, gives you all the great benefits that you need to really grow and have a flexible model of data collection. Now, when it comes to the open source landscape out there, there's a number of open source agents on the logging side. You have Fluentd, you have Fluentd, you have Logstash. You even have some newer players like Vector from Timber.io. And also Open Telemetry is also investing in logging. And while it is early stages, it is some component that they want to add to their stack. When you look at metrics, you have another set of tools. You have Telegraf, you have Prometheus, you have Collectd, you have Vector again. Vector is a data collector that also can collect metrics. But you also have Open Telemetry. And again, it's still early stages, but this is being invested in by Open Telemetry. And finally, you have traces. Now, when it comes to agent collection for tracing, Open Telemetry is pretty much it. Open Telemetry is the only real agent out there that can be used to collect traces as far as an agent goes. Yes, of course, you have Jaeger and you have Zipkin and all the different things, but Open Telemetry kind of sits in the middle of that. It provides that universal standard for things. And I think what's really interesting to call out here is in the scape is when you look at agents that are trying to do all things, Open Telemetry sees the value of machine data, be it logs, metrics, traces, it doesn't really matter. Open Telemetry recognizes that customers need the ability to collect all of their machine data. And it is the only universal data collector out there that is 100% fully open source and maintained solely in the community. I think that this is a real interesting approach to things because it's a number of vendors, a number of cloud providers coming together around a concept of open telemetry for data collection and kind of democratizing that, right? And I think that goes back to my benefit point that I was talking about, which is it gives you choice. When you don't have vendor lock-in, but you're able to send your data and all your data to anywhere. It's a very, very important piece. So let's take a look at some examples of how you can use open source agents to get data to Sumo. And the first one I want to start with is Fluentd. We've actually had an integration with Fluentd for a number of years now. Fluentd is like most open source agents, it's built on the concept of this plugin driven architecture. You have input data, input plugins. These get data into the agent, such as Fluentd, followed by output plugins that get data to some destination that you want to send that to. And your input plugins can be a number of things. It can be log files, it can be database logs, it can be system logs, it can be database connections, it can be third-party integrations. It can be anything you really want it to be, because the open source plugins, they're expansive. They integrate with a number of technologies. And then once you have data into Fluentd, as long as there's an output plugin that can get it somewhere, you can get it to wherever you need to. So for example, we have a Sumo Logic output plugin, and that's how we get data from Fluentd into Sumo Logic. And therefore, anything that can go into Fluentd through its vast integrations of input plugins can all come to Sumo Logic now. Fluentd is actually going to come up in a little bit too, because Fluentd is very integral to our Kubernetes collection process. For those of you who were here last year at a conference, you know that we introduced a brand new Kubernetes collection process, and Fluentd is an integral part of that and continues to remain an integral part of that today. Now, one of the things that we're adding support for today is Telegraf. A Telegraf is an open source metrics collector. It collects metrics data primarily. It is built on the same kind of plugin logic that Fluentd is. You have input plugins to get data into a system. You have output plugins to get data into a different system, some respective sink or some other location you want it to go. And Telegraf is really the first metrics agent that we were actually adding as far as full-on open source support. And how we've actually added a output plugin for Sumo Logic. And so now users who can use Telegraf can very easily get anything that comes into Telegraf into Sumo Logic. Again, that plugin architecture makes it very simple. Anything that can go into Telegraf can now come to Sumo. Telegraf supports a number of metric sources, including databases, operating systems, system stats. It can support networking layer or message queues. even very specific applications like Nginx or JMX and Apache and those kinds of things. And as part of this, we've actually updated some of our own integrations, expanding what we can collect from by having apps that not only collect logs for components, but now adding metrics for things. So today we're announcing that we have updated Nginx app. Our Nginx app now supports logs and metrics. And we also have an updated Redis app that supports logs and metrics. And we're also adding a new app for JMX integration. So collecting JMX integration metrics out of the box. We have an app that can help you visualize all that content and provide you a great out of the box experience with low time to value. Now, Telegraf is just in one other example, but I thought I would actually take a little revisit to our Kubernetes collection process. Our Kubernetes collection process, we released this last year. It was complete open source, built on a lot of these technologies that I've gone through today. And I think that it was the first time we'd really put this kind of a process together, built fully on open source, but really leveraging the best of the tools. But we've actually added a number of things to that I want to talk about today. So to recap our Kubernetes collection process, there's a number of components in play. We use Fluentd for log collection, runs as a daemon set on the cluster. It's responsible for gathering all of the logs that are running in the cluster. We also run Fluentd. And Fluentd serves an important point. It serves as the enrichment point. And it's actually the central point that logs and metrics also flow through to give us that consistent unified metadata across the system. Not only is it providing the metadata, but it's also collecting the events that happen in the Kubernetes cluster as well. And metrics, of course, we leverage Prometheus to get the data from Prometheus into Fluentd and therefore into Sumo. And again, Prometheus is kind of the de facto choice of any Kubernetes cluster. With its great robust auto-discovery capabilities and easy deployment. It's very easy to deploy and set up. Now, what we've done is we've actually added and incorporated Open Telemetry, specifically for the tracing parts today. And now we have full visibility into every component in Kubernetes and every data stream that's important to watch and would be most crucial to watch. All of this gets packaged up as a Helm chart and is as easy to install in Sumo Logic as Helm installs Sumo Logic. Now, this kind of an architecture and putting these open source components together for this solution really bring a lot of benefits. We have comprehensive data collection for all the observability telemetry. It's leveraging an open stack, fully built on open standards. It has native metadata-based K8s hierarchy navigation. So you ensure that you capture all of your Kubernetes hierarchies. We make sure that those are easy to search through that metadata enrichment process. It is deeply integrated across the logs, the metrics, the traces, all the metadata enrichment. And it efficiently accounts for ephemeral container time series. Our backend can handle the ephemeral nature of this. It can handle the cardinality of this. It can handle the general challenges that come with some time series analytics in the Kubernetes backend. And all of this is paired with Sumo Logic's out-of-the-box advanced analytics with dependency mapping and correlation. And when you put all of these things together, you get a really great observability experience. Seamlessly integrated across your infrastructure, across your applications, across all the data streams of Sumo, and really focusing on leveraging that entity-driven troubleshooting approach to drive from signal to root cause very quickly and as fast as possible. Now, open source, I've talked a lot about the benefits of open source. I've talked a lot about the benefits of how you can use it and kind of some examples of how we use it today, even at Sumo. But I think there's a couple of considerations. And the one consideration that I think is really important is that open source still requires an investment. You still have an agent that you need to go learn. You still have an agent or a framework that you need to go deploy. And there's investment in that. It's not all for nothing. But the benefit is that that can truly be a one-time investment. When you select the right agent, you select an agent that suits your needs and is also built on open standards that most vendors support. then you're able to make that a one-time investment. You don't have to spend time ripping everything out and replacing everything out if you decide to change vendors. Because once you get that in place, it's an effort. It's an effort to set it up, and it's an effort to undo it if you need to make a migration later. So if I leave you with three things that I think are the most important things that I want to leave you with, it's that when you think about open source, understand that open source can expand what you can collect, and it can give you flexibility. You can have collection that is built on open standards, and they can make it much easier to pivot to tools that support those open standards. You don't have to rip out your entire data collection infrastructure every time you need to make a change. You also don't have to reinvent the wheel of getting data into a system. I mean, by and large, open source has solved, how do I collect from X and insert whatever technology you want there? Because that's a problem that is by and large solved in open source. And finally, it's, again, you need to consider if you can make the investment. While it does bring a lot of benefits, it's not for free. There's time and there's effort that you have to invest in those things. And you want to make sure that it's the right investment for you. And so with that, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.